principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday night. It's 10 p.m. here in London. And I have to admit, feeling a little tired tonight. Not sure exactly why. Had a good night's sleep last night. I think I skipped lunch. I think that was a big mistake. And I blame Brazzy for that in London. So anyway, thanks for joining me tonight. So last night, I did a show, and then after the show, I had an interview on live television in London on a new channel, kind of a I think it's fair to call it right wing, new news commentary TV station in the UK, kind of to combat the left leaning BBC. Left leaning, I think, is generous, and that network is GB News, and it's brand new. And I was contacted in May sometime by a producer at GB News asking if I wanted to come on periodically, and I said yes. And then they came back and said, well, we're not sure exactly how to use you, when. So nothing really happened for a while. And then I was coming to London, so I contacted them and said, hey, I'm going to be in London. Would love to do a live show. So they contacted me back and said, yes, absolutely, we'd love to have you. And they put me on last night at 11 p.m. on Mark Dolan's show on a segment called Uncancelled. And it was a good-sized segment. It was about 20 minutes. I think many of you have probably seen some skits, some of the sections on Twitter. Those are small segments that they put from the full recording. I'm hoping to get the full recording, and I'll be able to put it up on YouTube. That is my goal. We'll see if they'll provide that. But I've asked for it, and so far they've said yes. So yesterday I was exhausted, but by the time I actually got to go and do it, and live TV is thrilling. It's exciting. It gets adrenaline going. You kind of walk into. I had no idea what they were going to talk to me about. We never talked about a topic. I had no idea what issues were going to be raised. It turned out that they wanted to talk about COVID and economic freedom, and they mentioned equals unfair, and so it was a great interview. I think I was good. I do good live television. I really do good live television. I mean, I always Neil Cavuto always complimented me on the quality of my live television. Anyway, it was great, and then I talked to the host, so it was like a Q&A with the host, and then there was a panel there, and the idea was the panel would have me ask me questions, but it turned out only the woman in the panel asked me a question, and you can see this section in Twitter. On Twitter has a video of it. Where she asked me, well, that's all good and fair, capitalism and all that, but what about, you tell me, what did she ask? What about the poor? What about the fact that they are disadvantaged, that they're not born with the, with the right parents, with the right opportunities, with all of that? The typical question you get asked. And then she snuck in this, and of course, we've exploited the colonies and colonization, and they're poor because of what we did to them. We stole their resources from them and exploited them. And that, you ask a question like that, and it's going to set me off. So not only did I deal with the issue of, this is what you do with. This is why it's bogus to ask about poor people and to ask about opportunities. The fact that you're born with not so good opportunities doesn't give you a claim against my life. Doesn't give you a moral claim against me. Doesn't give you a right to penalize me. And then the colonization part was interesting because I gave an answer on colonization. You can see it, and we'll talk about colonization in a little bit. But what was amazing to me was the look on her face. And I think you can see a little bit of this and the look on the other panelist's face, because she basically was looking at the host with this look of, can he say this? Like, aren't you going to shut him down? Aren't you going to stop him? This you can't say this stuff. You can't express this kind of stuff on national television, on live television. And other panelists were like fidgeting, and you could tell they didn't want to touch it. It's like, there's certain topics like colonialism that you can't talk about it. And this is a broader issue of it's the same thing when I said something on Sam Seder's show about, well, I mean, these are the people who chose not to fix their building. They were warned, and then they suffer the consequences of their own decision. You can't say that. You can't attribute personal responsibility to people. You can't expect them to do the right thing. And if they don't do the right thing, you can't expect them to suffer the consequences. The whole job of government is to protect you from the consequences, is to eliminate consequences, is to give you a free ride no matter what decisions you make. You're not responsible for your own decisions. After all, you don't have free will. So it was. I think it was a good segment. I encourage you to watch it. I think particularly my answer about the poor and about colonialism was good. It clearly upset them. But the host, as soon as the thing ended, the host, Mark Dolan, I mean, he basically gave me a standing ovation, stood up and clapped, and it was a lot of fun. I think the panelists were they weren't sure, but he was enthusiastic. The producer said they want to have me back. They want to make me, in a sense, a regular kind of commentator from the U.S. I would do it via Zoom. Hopefully, when I come back to the UK in the future, they'll have me on live in the studio, because it really is. It's so much more fun to do it live in the studio. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see if I didn't, my answer on colonialism didn't kind of cross a line for them. But hopefully it didn't. Hopefully they're open to being challenged on these kind of issues. They try to play it a little too nice, in my view. Jennifer wants me to get on Neil Oliver's show. I'd love to get on Neil Oliver's show, so I'll prod the producer and see if we can get on Neil Oliver's show. But it was a great experience. They have beautiful studios, pretty simple setup as compared to Fox or CNN or anything like that. Pretty simple, straightforward setup. In I don't know what Marylebone or Paddington, somewhere in that area. Anyway, I enjoyed it. I think. And the other good thing was Twitter exploded. So I've added, I don't know, 300-400 followers on Twitter, and I've added well over 200, maybe 300 people, subscribers on YouTube. We're actually like this close. Maybe tonight we can cross the barrier to 27,000. So if there anybody listening right now is not a subscriber, please press on that subscription button and help us get to 27,000, because we're this close. I mean, we were 26,980 something, right? So we were about 12, 14 short of 27,000. And that's because of their appearance on live television. So this has affirmed for me something that I've known for a long time, but I don't know how to make it exactly happen. And that is that live TV still matters, that people still watch it, that there's still value in it. If I could go back, I think, to the days where I was doing Fox and CNBC and other television on a regular basis. I mean, I was on Fox more than once a week for a period there in 2008, 2009. If I could get onto some of these big television shows, the following here would explode, and that is maybe the avenue to get us to the 100,000 subscribers, which is our target, our short-term target. So anyway, I really hope that that this will be the beginning of at least a relationship with GB, and maybe we'll increase the number of Brits who listen to your own book show and who follow the Iran book show. Maybe that's where the future is. Maybe the future is in Great Britain and less so in the United States. I don't know. But the response was very positive and very good. So I'm happy about that. I did an event this afternoon for the Ayn Rand Center in UK on tribalism in politics, which was good. I wish we had hundreds of people in the audience. We didn't. Maybe one day, but we need to get back into the groove. Partially live events, need to get back into the groove of live events. People need to get more comfortable with going out and going into crowds and doing things. So I'm very hopeful that that's where we're heading. All right, as you know, you can ask me questions. You have to use the Super Chat feature to do that. That way I pay attention. I know I copy paste them onto Word doc and get to them. $20 or more questions get priority. So it's a great way to show your support for the show. I know many of you don't support the show on kind of a monthly basis on Patreon or Subscribestar or youronbookshow.com/support. One way you can still support the show is through the Super Chat, and then you do, whatever you can afford and whatever the show represents in terms of values for you. You can just do it via Super Chat. And in that context, thank you, Gene. Thank you, Roland. Roland puts in 20 pounds as to energize me. I need it. I'm a little low energy today. After the live event, maybe after late night, maybe I'm getting old. I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe, I don't know. I keep thinking at some point I'm going to get COVID, but I keep testing negative. I just did another test yesterday, so it's not COVID, but I do feel weak and tired, so I can't wait to get to sleep. Stephen, thank you. Tomorrow I fly back to the United States. Our next show, whenever that happens to be, will be from Puerto Rico, from my regular office in Puerto Rico. Jonathan says, awesome debate today, you're on. Wasn't really a debate, but it was kind of a panel, but it was fun. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for the support. Thanks for watching. Delighted to support your work and keep it up. Thanks. See, I'm even coughing. I'm telling you. I don't have. I can't post it right now. Maybe somebody else. The trillionaire. I wish he was a trillionaire. Maybe he could throw a few dollars my way if he was a trillionaire. Is asking that I post the video from Twitter. I can't access Twitter right now, but coffee's not permitted this late at night because then I won't sleep. Put out put on if somebody out there can find it on Twitter and post it on the chat, that would be great. So Trillion and others can do it. Yes, you can say, can you post? Absolutely. Feel free to post on the chat the link to the videos. But what I really want is video of my entire interview, because they only put out 2 segments, a minute segment and a 5-minute segment, out of what was about a 20-minute interview. Alexis, thank you. That is incredibly generous. Thanks. Alexis says he's in London. I actually had coffee with him today. For once, I showed a decent time for us in the UK. What is your general sentiment on UK politics these days relative to US and EU, especially with major changes that was Brexit? I'll get to that in a second. Grant Shapiro, amazing talk today. Hopefully you'll be back soon. Thank you. I expect to be back in September. The plan is for me to come probably September 15th and be in London for a few days, and then maybe do an event in Berlin and an event in, where else were we talking about? Amsterdam, but an event in Berlin, an event in Amsterdam. And then I'm scheduled to speak at a conference in Lisbon in Portugal. And Lisbon, Portugal, I've been approached by the political parties of the right. So these are right of center kind of conservative political parties across Europe. They hold a conference every year. And I spoke at a conference of theirs. I was invited by Daniel Hannan, who represented the Conservative Party of the UK Conservative Party in that affiliation, but who, since a Brexit, they no longer are part of the European Parliament, is no longer involved. But anyway, they reached up and invited me to come and speak at a conference of theirs in Lisbon. So for those of you wondering about reaching out to conservatives. I've been reaching out to conservatives for 20-something years. And sounds like an early Beatles itinerary. It's actually pretty, yeah, Berlin, Amsterdam, yes. I'm not going to spend as much time in Berlin as the Beatles did. I don't think I could tolerate that. But Berlin, Amsterdam, Lisbon, and maybe one other place we're trying to see, maybe Madrid, maybe Paris. If you know anybody in Madrid or Paris that would like to host an event, would love to do it, or anywhere else in Europe, particularly Western Europe for this trip. We'll do Eastern Europe another time. Yes, you're right. Scott's right. The Beatles were in Hamburg, not in Berlin. They were in Hamburg. Don't particularly like Hamburg either. I mean, I don't want to offend any Germans out there, but I'm not a particularly fan of Germany. Okay, to Alex's question, he put $50 after all into the question, so he deserves an early response. What is your general sentiment on the UK politics these days relative to US and EU, especially with major change that was Brexit? I mean, I commented about Brexit at the time, and I've commented a few times since. My sentiment about Brexit has not changed. Brexit is fantastic if the UK does the right thing. That is, if the UK shrugs off European regulations, establishes more of a free market in the UK, gets rid of the requirement to negotiate trade deals through the EU and negotiates free trade deals directly. Ideally, I mean, if I were in charge of the UK government, don't worry, nobody's going to let me get anywhere close to being in charge of the UK government. I would lower tariffs unilaterally, just unilaterally to zero. Imagine what would happen. Imagine what would happen if the UK became what it was, 100 and, after the Corn Laws of 1860 something, a free trade island. Imagine if they just made the island free trade. We have no tariffs. You can sell anything here. I mean, it would be a true revolution, and the UK would become much richer, much faster. Economic growth in the UK would accelerate in spite of all the fears and the panic and so on that I'm sure politicians would be gripped by. So it's what they do with Brexit. Are you going to move the UK towards greater freedom? And so far the record is mixed because, look, the EU has a lot of problems. The EU was terrible in the sense that, the EU was very leftist. The EU was very pro-regulations, oppressive regulations, big regulations, massive regulations, controlling, devastating. But the record so far for the UK is I'd say, overall negative. Boris Johnson's government has embraced the idea of regulating big tech following the EU. Indeed, the UK regulatory bodies have said they are going to be just as aggressive. They're going to be more aggressive. They're going to compete with the EU on who can be more aggressive to regulate big tech. They're going to be super regulators. So this is a conservative government. This is the conservatives. This is the free market guys. And they want to be more aggressive about breaking up monopolies and regulating more aggressive than the European Union regulators. So what did you gain by that? And then, of course, maybe the most disappointing thing is that the United Kingdom is committed to being more aggressive than Europe in achieving climate change goals, in going carbon neutral, whatever the hell that means, in massively investing in solar and wind. Now, I don't know how many of you guys who are not listening from the UK know anything about UK weather. But I can tell you, it's right now in the rest of the world, in the rest of the Northern Hemisphere, it's August. August typically means summer. Summer typically means warmth. Warmth typically means sunshine. God, since I've been here in the UK, 3 days, and I'm told the whole summer's been like this. I wouldn't even call it summer. This whatever season it happens to be. It's been cloudy. It's been rainy. It's been, from where I come from, cold. It's been in the 50s and 60s. eked into the 70s during the day yesterday. Once in a while, you get a glimpse of the sun. It's rainy, cold, miserable, gray. They never got the memo about summer. I don't think they know what summer is. I mean, I've been to the UK in the summer where it's been sunny and it's been warm and I've often had good weather in the UK, not now. So I don't know, this global warming stuff is skipping over the UK and actually making maybe the UK colder. Maybe it's making the UK grayer. Maybe it's making, I don't know. But climate change is definitely happening. The UK has abolished summer. But don't worry, because in spite of the fact that they never see the sun, in spite of the fact that there's no sunshine, they will be heavily investing in solar energy. It's depressing. This is the conservative government committing to going electric, going solar, going alternative. You know, there's a little bit more appetite in the UK than in the United States for nuclear power, so maybe they'll do that. We'll see. But so far, Boris Johnson's government has locked down the UK. Finally, they opened everything up when it was July 19th, Freedom Day. So that was good. It took them a while to open up to foreign travelers. That happened in August 2nd to US. So far, this conservative government, in a Brexit world where they could basically do what they want, free of European thumbs up, free of European control, free of European parliament and European socialism, have been really, really, really bad. I mean, yeah, better than Corbyn, better than the Labour Party, but really, really, really bad. And this is the same thing as in the US. The left and the right are basically all left. The left and the right on economics, certainly on economic freedom, are all left of center. There is no free market political party. There is no appetite for free trade. There is no appetite for reducing regulations or reducing the role of government in the economy. It's depressing. So would you, are they better off than if they were part of Europe? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Because at least with Europe, you had free trade with Europe. And I'm big on free trade. I mean, free trade, one of the most important economic issues there are, right? Free trade goes a long way, even if you screw up your regulations or your taxes. So I'm not very positive. I didn't bring up Trump, but Brownie003 brought up Trump, and he says Trump reduced regulations. Yes, he reduced some regulations. In some departments, actually increased regulations. There was no reduction in regulations in the Treasury Department. So over many financial institutions, there was actually arguably an increase in regulations. Freddie and Fannie still exist. They're still in receivership. Nothing really happens in finance. Arguably, there was no reduction in regulations. But yes, certainly in energy, Trump was very good for energy. Trump was good at reducing regulations in the EPA, environmental, and other. But, and I said this at the time, the problem with Trump deregulation is it was all done at the agency level. It was all done by executive order and at agencies. And as a consequence of that, it could easily, with a signature of a pen on a document, be reversed. Whereas the deregulations we saw in the 1970s and early 1980s were done through the legislature. They were hard work to build consensus around them, but they're done through the legislature. And they lasted because it's very, very, very difficult to reverse something the legislature does. So Trump had 4 years. He did some deregulation. All of that is being reversed by Biden. So what do we achieve? Very little. What you need is a massive overhaul of regulations in the United States. And to do that, you have to do it through legislation, not through executive order and not through the regulatory agencies, which are run by career bureaucrats who are not going to implement your deregulations anyway. So anyway. Let's see. So, but putting all that aside, Alexis, I'm not optimistic about politics, but I'm not optimistic about politics anyway, right? Anyway. What I find is in the UK, students generally are better educated. They're more knowledgeable about history. They just have better English, not just because of the accent, but better English because I think they study it. I think the educational system at the good schools is probably better than it is in the United States. There's less, even though there's a lot, there's less political correctness, CRT, all the nonsense of the left seems to be less of that in the UK. Brian, thank you. That's very generous. Really appreciate that. Generally, I find British culture to be a little healthier than American culture. Less, probably less tribal and polarized and obsessive. Maybe because everything is gray, right? The UK public is pretty much in the center, and they like certain things about Johnson. They dislike there's no, it's not quite as tribal. The tribal loyalties are not quite there. Right? And yeah, so I don't know. For years I've been relatively optimistic about the UK. It's just the political class is so bad, so bad. And even people who are, yeah, Jennifer says less Puritan. Yeah, there's less of the Puritan influence that is so prevalent in the US. They have a better accent, much better accent. And also, how dare you me, you're on? What did I say? Daniel, what did I say? But also, I find young people here more engaged, more intellectual, I guess is the point. More intellectual. I've met more kind of thoughtful Brits. And it's interesting, if you look at ARI's programs, if you look at the Objectives Academic Center and the number of new students coming in, the number of foreigners entering the educational programs at the Ayn Rand Institute is far in excess of their proportion in the population. All across the world. So you get Israelis, you got kids from Poland, you get Brits, you get all over Europe, and in proportion fewer Americans. I think because America is a far less, particularly today, intellectual culture that is where the educational system, because of John Dewey, is much worse than the rest of Europe. All right, let's see. Somebody says Cockney accent isn't good. Don't say that. Do you know? Here's a secret that most of you do not know. But when I was a kid, I actually spent 2.5 years in London, on the east side of London, in an area I think just east of Hackney. If you know London at all, Hackney was a rough place, but in those days was dominated, well, not dominated, but there was a big Jewish community in Hackney. And I lived in Hackney, or just east of Hackney, just outside Hackney. And I had, and there was actual audio, reel-to-reel tape evidence of this. I had a Cockney accent. I spoke Cockney as a 6-7-year-old. And it's quite embarrassing. My parents have the tapes, and they threaten that if I misbehave, they will release them publicly. I'm kidding, of course, but yeah, one day maybe I'll play you some of Yaron Brook as a child speaking Hackney. We used to record me on a reel-to-reel tape and send the tapes to my grandparents, who lived in South Africa. So the evidence exists, right? Recriminating evidence of Yaron Brook speaking Cockney. Cockney has a certain charm to it. let's see. You know, it's also, I have to say just one thing. It's also the period in my life, 6 to 8, where I became an atheist. So, good period. That Cockney stuff really worked well on me. I played a little cricket. I was English, and I rejected God all at the same time. All right. All right. Let's see. I want to talk a little bit about this issue of the poor, about colonialism, and about really about choice. So the point I made last night on the TV show was people have choices. You might be born poor, but I know significant numbers of poor people who've made the most of the opportunities they had. And I'd love them to have more opportunities. I'd like to maximize the opportunities for the poor. But that involves more capitalism and more freedom, not less. But to say to people, because you're poor, because you were born poor, it's okay to be poor, is to trivialize them as individuals. It's to trivialize the choices that they have. It's to trivialize the free will that they have. People can choose to be successful. They can take the actions necessary to be successful. They can will themselves through reason to be successful. I mean, it really is insulting to poor people to say, born poor, stuck being poor, they need handouts. The only way they'll come out of poverty is if we give them stuff, if we redistribute wealth. It's unfair. It's unfair, we're told, that some people are born into wealth and some people are born into poverty. How can it be unfair? It's a metaphysical fact. It's reality. It's not anybody's choice. Fairness relates to individual choice, but nobody chooses to be born poor, chooses to be born rich. You can't apply morality to the fact that you're born. You can't apply fairness to what genes you have. You have the genes that you have. And now the question is, how do we create an environment in which you can maximize your abilities given whatever genes you have? And that is only possible through freedom, through capitalism. Capitalism is freedom. It's a system of freedom, political system of freedom. And when you say something like, well, they're born poor, what can they do? You're basically taking away agency from people who happen to be poor. You're being anti-poor by doing that. My view is the opposite. My view is to tell poor kids, yes, you were born poor. Yes, you will have fewer opportunities than my children. But you know what? You still have opportunities. And if you apply yourself, if you study hard, if you think, if you use your mind, if you apply yourself intellectually and in terms of work, you can still achieve. You can still be successful. You can still attain happiness. The goal of life ultimately is happiness. That is not blocked to you because you were born poor. Now, I get it. It's going to be harder for you than for other people. But you know what? Somebody born middle class or born rich, it's no guarantee. Because they don't apply themselves often. Because they cruise off of their parents' wealth. Because they're spoiled rotten. Or because they just choose not to think, not to use their mind, not to apply their agency. They're not going to be happy. They're not going to be successful at life. You can be. Anybody can be. Stop using your poverty as an excuse. Stop using your circumstances as an excuse. And to the middle class, upper middle class, wealthy, intellectual snobs who present themselves as defenders of the poor by telling them that they have no chance, by telling them They're without a handout. They can't succeed. Well, to hell with you. You're doing more damage than good. You're destroying the lives of young, ambitious, poor people. Indeed, the biggest victims of the mixed economy that you advocate for, the biggest victims of that mixed economy are ambitious, poor people. The answer is free will. The answer is agency. The answer is apply yourself. And at whatever level you apply yourself, you don't have to be super smart to be super happy. You have to set your goals consistent with your ability, achieve those goals, live a good life, live a life of purpose, of reason, self-esteem, and you can achieve happiness. And when you tell people you're too poor to be successful, you're too stupid to be successful, you're too incompetent to be successful, when they're kids, when they're young, when they haven't done anything yet, you're destroying lives. That is true evil. Here, take a check because we know you're too incompetent to ever succeed by yourself. But that is what people do, left and right. And then they do it on a big scale. Not just on the scale of individuals, but now on the scale of countries. That's what this woman last night was trying to say. You know, European guilt. The reason countries in Africa are poor is because of colonialism. No. The reason African countries are poor is because the African people in those countries, have chosen not to embrace Western values. They've chosen not to embrace freedom, capitalism, individual rights, property rights. And indeed, African countries that embraced even a little bit of this have done relatively well. The reason they're poor is not because of past exploitation. Granted, that exploitation did happen. The reason they're poor is because they're not willing to embrace what leads to success. At the end of the Korean War, really until the early 1960s, so well after the Korean War, South Korea was as poor as Africa was. Why is South Korea so much richer than Africa today? Because South Korea embraced better policies, better politicians, better political structure, more freedom, more political and economic freedom. South Korea was colonized for decades and decades, really since the end of the 19th century. South Korea Korea Peninsula generally had to deal with Japanese colonialism. Japanese were brutal in Korea. They were horrific. If you've seen Mr. Sunshine, probably my favorite TV show, you get a glimpse of what it was like. And yet, you get two parts of Korea choosing two different political systems. The one has thrived and the one has become maybe one of the most oppressive, maybe the most oppressive place on planet Earth. Not because of colonialism, because they made bad choices. They chose bad leaders. They did not learn from the success of the West. But some places did. South Korea did. Taiwan did. Hong Kong did. Singapore did to some extent at least. Even China did to some extent. Certainly Japan did in post-World War II. In Africa, places that are slowly learning this, like Rwanda, like Botswana, I think, few others, that are embracing private property, that embraces institutions, that respect contracts and respect law, rule of law, are doing fine. Some of the fastest growing economies in the world today are in Africa. Others that are still mired in the victimhood associated with colonialism have brutal dictators, which they replaced with other brutal dictators, and go nowhere. That's not a legacy of colonialism. That's a legacy of tribalism. That's a legacy of the choices they are making. They could overthrow those brutal dictators. They do all the time. Just replace them with the same kind of person. And indeed, she mentioned that African countries are poor because they were exploited by colonialism. We stole all their wealth. Really? I mean, this is particularly weird and strange and mind-blowing. Was Africa really that rich when colonialism started? Was there really wealth in Africa? And we, not me, but the Brits, the French, the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Germans, Belgians, did they make them poorer? No, there's no wealth. Now, there were natural resources, but natural resources are worthless unless you have an industrial society for which they're being used. It's not that we took Africa from being rich to being poor by exploiting in a zero-sum world. Now, it is true. I do not want to whitewash colonialism. Colonialism was often brutal, illegitimately, immorally so. It was often exploitative. It's still, in many of these countries, people are still being exploited. Colonialism was often nasty, mean, racist. I mean, the slave trade is a good example. But also, in particular, I remember reading about Belgian colonialism as being particularly brutal. It was harsh. Partially, it was harsh just because advanced civilization meeting a primitive civilization, as Ayn Rand makes the point, bad stuff is going to happen. But it wasn't just that. There were choices that the colonists made that they didn't have to make in terms of suppressing the freedom of the people they were colonizing in ways that were unnecessary, unnecessarily brutal, unnecessarily murderous. And that should not be whitewashed. But at the same time, colonialism also brought amazing technology, resources, wealth to these places. The railroads in India, or more importantly than the railroads in India. More important than railroads in India was the educational system in India. Educational system in India and Pakistan, unfortunately, it's been undercut in Pakistan by Islam, but in India, the tech schools, the fact that they all speak English, the fact that they get, at least if you're in the right caste, that you get a great education based on the British system of education, has benefited India enormously, particularly once the Indian economy was freed up. So I was talking today at the event we did here in London to a man from Iraq. Now, he has an amazing story, and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing the story publicly, but I will share it in a minute. He has an amazing story about discovering Ayn Rand, maybe the best story I've ever heard about discovering Ayn Rand. Blew me away. But he has a story about Iraq being this primitive, horrible, corrupt place before the British occupied it. The British occupied it after World War I, 1917. And how the British brought Iraq schools and infrastructure, education, eradicated corruption, institutions. It changed Iraq completely. And yes, it was ultimately corrupted by Saddam Hussein and today completely corrupt. But the British were good for Iraq. And the British were good for a lot of places. Now, again, this is not to whitewash British brutality in some of their colonies. They did some horrible things in India. They did some horrible things in South Africa. They were brutal and mean and nasty and immoral, but you can't ignore the good. And what African countries didn't do post-colonization, and that India didn't do for a long time. It took India until the late 1980s, early 1990s to start benefiting. What they didn't do is embrace the better parts, the good that the colonists brought with them, the Enlightenment values, the respect for technology and learning and study and education. If they had embraced those things and freedom and the institutions of freedom, including property rights, and if they'd embraced those, is there any doubt that these countries would be richer and better? But this is the point I made at the show yesterday. Instead of telling them that, instead of educating them about the value of freedom, about the value of capitalism, about the value of political freedom, economic freedom, property rights, instead of giving them the benefit of making the choice for themselves, what do? What does the West do? It does the same thing it does to the poor. It says, your poverty is not your fault. The violence in your countries is not your fault. It's our fault. We made you into a victim. We, through colonialism, are responsible for all the death and destruction and poverty that exist in your countries. We ask for forgiveness and will send you checks, and we don't expect much from you, and we don't expect you to adopt the institutions of freedom and adopt the institution of success. We're gonna let you. We're gonna give you a free pass because you're the victim. And it's our fault that you're poor. And what we need is more sacrifice on our part to compensate. And that's, again, treating them like children. It's treating them like they're not moral political agents of themselves. I think it's racist to say Africans, well, what can you do? They were victimized 100 years ago. What can you do? It's degrading to the Africans that they're being told constantly by the West, it's our fault. You're poor because of us. No, they're not. They're poor because of their choices they made. We didn't help. We're still not helping. Indeed, we're hurting. This victim mentality. And it's the guilt. And as Jennifer says, it's condescending. We're superior to you. We can figure out freedom. We can handle property rights. We can handle voting and democracy and institutions. You can't. Because we did bad things to you. It's our fault. We'll take on the burden of the guilt. But don't worry, be happy. Well, don't be happy. You can't be happy because you're victims. It's sad. It's sad. What we should be doing is exporting our values. What we should be doing is exporting the ideas that we know guarantee human prosperity. We know are successful. We know are good in the context of human flourishing. We know that they lead to flourishing. Instead, we're abandoning those values ourselves. We're reverting back to a Middle Ages mentality. We're embracing Middle Ages values. We're rejecting the Enlightenment, embracing Plato, embracing mysticism, embracing the nation states, walls, socialism, control, lack of free speech. Instead of asking Africa to become like us, we're becoming like China. And China, by the way, is exporting their ideology. China is aggressively encouraging people to mimic them, is exporting their institutions, exporting their experience. You want to be rich like China? Embrace our authoritarian methodology. China is a real threat because they are willing to expand. They're willing to educate people about their ideology. They're not embarrassed. They don't feel guilty. They're not ashamed. But the West refuses to do so. The West is not just stabbing Africa in the back. It's stabbing itself in the back. So what we need is what we've always needed. Nothing new here. We need a return to the values of the Enlightenment, the true Western values, an understanding of the universal principles that guarantee human flourishing. A respect for reason, science, the human mind, and a recognition that it's all about the individual and that the state's only role is to protect that individual. It's not to protect the culture. It's not to protect the nation, whatever the hell that is. It's to protect the rights of individuals. It's to protect your freedom. That's what was understood by Enlightenment thinkers. Now we have Ayn Rand, who provides a much more robust, grounded, philosophically integrated system to protect the values of Western civilization, the values of the Enlightenment. Ayn Rand is the culmination, in many regards, of Enlightenment thinking. She's the integrator of all the best ideas from the Enlightenment and grounds them in a proper philosophical structure. That's why you should read Ayn Rand. And that's why you should advocate for Ayn Rand. Not for this nonsense that the West is descending into, both on the left and on the right, you know. Anyway, that is my my monologue. It's all about personal responsibility, but not in a kind of conservative, superficial way. It's all about taking responsibility for your whole life, for your life, all the way down. All the way down. It's taking responsibility for your mind, taking responsibility for your soul, building, creating, making a soul. And then insisting on being free. Because freedom is the only political system appropriate for thinking, rational, responsible individuals. Individuals with self-esteem would demand freedom. And then exporting those ideas to the rest of the world because, hey, we would be much better off here if the rest of the world agreed with these ideas. It's a big fight we have in front of us. It's not going to be easy. The forces arrayed against us are significant. But hey, we got the best on our side. Truth, reality. Can't ask for more than that. Can't ask for more than that. You got to export the ideas of the Enlightenment, which will bring about capitalism like that. And we did that. We did that in Japan. We did that in South Korea. We did that in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. But we have to be convinced of the goodness of those ideas first, and we're not. The West is not being murdered. The West is not being killed. The West is not being overrun. The West is committing suicide because we're abandoning the values that made us the West. All right. Let's see. $20 Super Chat questions. We'll start with those. Roland says, here's a Super Chat to energize you. Thank you, Roland. He also asks, come to Gibraltar. It's been sunny all day today with a high of 79. Yeah, I mean, Gibraltar is beautiful. It's right there on the southern Spanish coast. It is British though, supposedly. But it's got some of the best weather in the world. Andrew says, "Hi, you're on. Great talk at Game College today. Thank you. Was good to chat with you today and tell you about our first meeting in late 2016 in Prague. Too bad couldn't get into the flat to continue discussion. Would be great to speak again. Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Yeah, sorry you couldn't get into the flat, but it was a very small flat, so he had to have some standard by which to restrict. Oh, I forgot to tell you this story about discovering Ayn Rand. So I hope it's okay that I tell the story. But no names. So this is a story about a doctor in Iraq who was in the Iraqi military in 1981 or 82 at the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War. So probably 1981. And it was at the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War. It was attached to a unit that overtook a Iranian town. And by the time he got there with a medical crew, the town had basically been pillaged already by the Iraqi soldiers that had preceded him. But the one part they hadn't got to was the town library. One of his associates, knowing that he and other medical doctors, they love to read, said that he would go to the library and collect some books and bring them over. And he did. He went out the library and bought a bunch of books in English because these doctors were educated and read English, and he bought them a bunch of books in English. One of those books, taken from a library in Iran, in a small city in Iran, was The Virtue of Selfishness by Ayn Rand. And this doctor, he didn't pick it up immediately. It took him a few months, but once he read it, he was hooked. And then it was just a matter of time of how quickly he could get out of Iraq and ultimately come to London, where he could pick up all of other Ayn Rand's books. Now think about this. A library in Khomeini's Iran had a copy of The Virtue of Selfishness, which was taken by a Iraqi soldier, to Iraqi doctor, who, as a consequence, over time, became an objectivist. Now that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. All right, let's see. Dan writes, great talk today, Iran. Thank you. I fully agree that education is the way to make changes, but do you see any leadership of any substance emerging from politicians, media, podcasts, etc., who might be able to influence the current status? No, there's no leadership from politics. And there's no leadership in the media. I mean, the media is dominated by the left and by Tucker Carlson, which are all statists, all anti-Enlightenment. But I do see leadership, for example, in education. I interviewed, I think I interviewed Matt Bateman, who works for a school network in the United States that is one of the largest, if not the largest, networks of Montessori schools in the world. They're building a whole educational framework, early to all through high school. It's a revolution. If you can do that, it's a revolution. So I don't see any politicians, media, podcasters. I mean, there's some decent podcasters out there. I've often recommended people. The other day, I did a whole yesterday I did a show where I was reading from something by Scott Alexander, who I think is very good. I think there are other very good, but they're all they're rational centrists. Almost none of them are radicals for capitalism. I mean, as I said yesterday, even though Scott Alexander was going after the FDA, he was not quite ready to come to the conclusion that it should be privatized, or that there were private alternatives, or the market could create private alternatives to the FDA. He wants to reform the FDA in some way. So, I just don't see it. Ultimately, the ideas of the Enlightenment have to be rediscovered. They have to be rediscovered over time. They have to be embraced by significant intellectuals, and they have to be promoted. And again, the better signs, they're better people. Some of them left of center, some of them right of center, who are embracing or recognizing that the Enlightenment is what we're missing. There are people like Steven Pinker who doesn't quite get it, but at least is talking about Enlightenment, talking about reason. He's got a new book coming out about reason, about rational thought. It's probably going to be significantly flawed, but at least that is a debate on the table. That is something we can discuss. At least there's openness to reason explicitly. And now we have to get our definitions right. We have to get exactly what we're talking about right. But those figures, those podcasters, writers, intellectuals are still in the minority, and they still don't quite have it. I highly recommend you listen to my interview with Shermer, with Michael Shermer, on The Skeptic. It's on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube. It's a good interview, but you get the sense of how he approaches issues, and he's one of the overall better people out there. Better people out there. So there is a group of them, but but it doesn't have weight because it doesn't have a philosophical system behind it like objectivism has, and that's what we need. Alexis says some Hong Kong protesters were branding UK flags. Yeah, they were, because the UK is one of the few countries, there were a few others, I think Australia and Canada maybe, that offered them passports. The Trump administration and the Biden administration have done nothing to support Hong Kongers who stood up to the Chinese government and now fear for their lives. The first thing Trump should have done last year was when the demonstrations were happening and they were being suppressed by the Chinese, is offered instant citizenship to any Chinese person who wanted to move here. Let all 7.5 productive, creative Chinese come to the United States. Why not? They're not mooches. They're not. They're hardworking, intelligent. They proved that by what they've done in Hong Kong. Why wouldn't you just give them a passport, right? And if you hesitate and say, "Oh God, 7 million, whoa," then are you really for freedom? So yes, Hong Kongers appreciated the fact that the Brits offered them, at least some of them, offered passports. Anson Me says, I just saw the long clip of GB News, such a pleasure to watch. We too often see how difficult it is to hold one's own in that kind of situation, but you knocked it out of the park. Bless you for that ray of hope. Yes, I think I did knock it out of the park, if I could say so myself. And as I said, I do good television, so I hope they have me back and we can do it more frequently. And I hope GB News expands and embraces the good ideas rather than being tempted by bad European ideas. Michael asks, is losing free speech the only legitimate reason to start a revolution? Is there any other draconian state measure where you would say, okay, it's time? I don't know, lockdowns? I mean, there are plenty of reasons. The state is so oppressive today, there's plenty of reasons today to start a revolution, but what's the point? Only way to legitimately start a revolution is to offer an option and to have enough people on your side that there's a slim chance of success. But nobody agrees with me. Even here in the chat, we have people who dramatically disagree with me, never mind out there in the world. So start a revolution for whom? Over what? To establish what? So we'd have to have some agreement on what we were voting against. For. Apollo says GB News is a Murdoch company. I didn't realize that. Huh. All right. We'll see how it evolves. Hopefully it'll be better than Fox, because Fox is a cesspool. Become a cesspool. Much better in the past. And it was a cesspool already then. Michael says, is everything absolute. Well, what do you mean by everything? Are your feelings absolute? I mean, reality is absolute. People's feelings, choices, I don't think necessarily are. I mean, absolute knowledge is absolute. Not everything is absolute knowledge. Not everything do you know. Jacob asks, how did you become a foodie? Best places in MO is MO Montana or Missouri? I can't remember. Either way, I don't know. I've not been a foodie in MO. How did I become a foodie? I don't know. At some point, we started going to nice restaurants. I think maybe it was the influence. Missouri, MO is Missouri, yeah. I've never eaten really qua foodie in Missouri. I think it was the influence of Iron Chef. I don't know how many of you remember Iron Chef, the Japanese program that later was embraced by the Americans, of these competitions around food. And suddenly, I think my wife and I discovered that food could be art and was quite magnificent and impressive. And I think the first real foodie experience was, I think this is true. I'll have to ask my wife if this is true, but I think it is, that that there was a chef from the Bay Area who did I can't remember what the it was some vegetable. It was the theme. There was a secret ingredient, right? And he cooked this dinner and it looked amazing. And I think we were going to visit the Bay Area. Oh, I know what it was. He presented his restaurant the exact menu that he had prepared at Iron Chef. So we decided we would fly to the Bay Area to go to the restaurant and experience this menu. And I think that's kind of when we really embraced foodism. I mean, and foodism at the expensive level. It was an amazing meal. It was more than just food. It was an experience. It was a show. It was fun. It was something you did together, and you had this sensual experience, but also this both taste and visually. And so since then, we've traveled the world and eaten at great restaurants. Now, I don't remember if that's exact sequence, but it's something like that. So I think it was Iron Chef that really got us into it. Scott asks, if the left has won for the last 100 years, how much longer do we wait while expecting some Tucker Carlson type to become a right-wing authoritarian? I don't know what you're talking. I don't understand the question. The right used to be much better. The effect of one of the effects of the left winning all the time, winning intellectually, winning in terms of policy, one of the effects of the left winning all the time is in degrading the right, in turning the right into, in economics, a version of the left, and turning the right into authoritarians. So what has slowly happened is that the right has gone from Calvin Coolidge to Donald Trump. From a free marketer, hands-off lover of the American founding to Donald Trump and to Tucker Carlson. And I think that as we drift further to the left, the right becomes worse. I think what happens is there's a constant interplay between the left and the right. As the left becomes worse, the right becomes worse, partially as a response to the bad stuff in the left. The left becomes collectivist, the right becomes more collectivist. The left becomes even more collectivist, the right becomes even more. The left becomes statist, the right becomes statist. So I don't know when authoritarianism is going to happen, and I don't know the path exactly. I just believe, and there's no certainty. I don't have a crystal ball. It's based on my evaluation of the facts of reality. I think authoritarianism is more likely to come to America. Formal authoritarianism, in a sense, we already have authoritarianism in America. It's more likely to come from the right than from the left, because I think Americans generally are on the right, not on the left. And I think the right has more integrated, cohesive strategies than the left does. The left is a disintegrator, and the right has the potential to be an integrator, a misintegrator, of course. So again, it's my hypothesis, my belief is that as the left pushes the country further to the left, further to disintegration, further to, and again, this, if you read Leonard Peikoff's Ominous Parallels, this is exactly what happened in Germany. Hitler was a response to the left. Authoritarianism in many parts of Europe has been a response to the left, to leftist agenda. And because the people don't buy the left, they don't buy disintegration. Right? So I'm very worried about leftist ideology, from critical race theory to socialism to everything. But my main worry about them is that they will cause this massive backlash from the right and destroy the country that way. That they will create an excuse for the authoritarians to take over. But look, if the left wins, I'm worried about that either way. So either way, I'm worried about what the left is doing. I think what the left is doing is disastrous, either because they win and it's a disaster, or because they lose and it's a disaster. They lose because the right outflank them in terms of authoritarianism and in terms of statism. There's no winning outcome given critical race theory, given socialism, given the racism and the irrationality of the left. There's no win situation here. In that sense, the left is an enemy. But if we care about the future, we have to recognize that they're not the only enemy, that they're enemies on both sides. And the only good response to the left is a response that doesn't replace with the left with something just as bad. It replaces the left with something good that moves the country in a good direction. And Tucker Carlson is not a good direction. All right. I'm not going to get into debate about Trump versus Biden because it's a silly debate. You're not talking at the same level as I'm talking. I'm sorry. But yes, on policy by policy by policy, Trump is better than Biden, but only by a tiny smidgen. And in the big picture, Trump led to Biden. You wouldn't have Biden if not for Trump. You wouldn't have CRT to the extent that you do if not for Trump. You wouldn't have Tucker Carlson if not for Trump. Trump is the one who lost the presidency, not me. Trump is the one who lost the House of Representatives to the Democrats, not me. Trump is the one who lost the Senate to the Democrats, not me. So Trump was a loser. Trump emboldened the left. Trump made the left possible. So don't blame me that Trump is a disaster for the Republican Party and for the right. And he handed it over to Biden. You know, you got Biden, not because of me, but because of Trump. Trump lost the election because of how he responded to COVID, not because of COVID. A virus doesn't cause anything. Other leaders didn't lose elections because of COVID. He lost because of how he responded to COVID, because his response was, to put it mildly, pathetic. As I explained yesterday, it was his CDC and his FDA and his individual response, which resulted in the catastrophe that is COVID in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of people did not have to die if the United States had taken this seriously at day one and responded appropriately. And he was the commander-in-chief, so he should be held responsible for COVID. So I'm glad he lost because of COVID. He deserved to lose because of COVID, because of his response. All right, anyway, as I said, I don't want to debate Trump. It's just not interesting. What are your views on the sport of boxing? I don't like boxing. I don't like mixed martial arts. I generally don't like sports that engage in violence. I don't enjoy watching them. It's a glorification of violence that I don't appreciate. I read a couple of days ago in the news that Biden is offering 18-month asylum for Hong Kong as a good start. Hope it becomes permanent. I hope so too. I mean, I don't know why 18-month asylum. Maybe there's some laws that restrict what he can offer them, but that is great, and that's again more than Trump did. And that should embolden many freedom fighters around the world. They know they have somewhere they can escape to if things get really bad. Do I like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? I don't have. I mean, I think that martial arts are great to learn for self-defense and to give you confidence in your ability to cope with violent situations. I'm not particularly enthralled with them as spectator sport. So I'm not against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I just don't enjoy watching it. Could you theoretically have met Ayn Rand? Was she alive when you discovered her writing? She was, and I could have. And I read Ayn Rand. I read Atlas Shrugged for the first time in 1977. And she was still alive. And indeed, I came to the United States in 1979 for a tour across the United States, a drive across the United States. I hitchhiked from coast to coast in the United States before the Army. So it was my kind of last hurrah before I was probably going to get killed in the Army in Israel. And theoretically, I could have gone to New York and knocked on her door or tried to figure out, but I didn't even think of it. To me, she was larger than life. Why would she be interested in 18-year-old kid from Israel? Who was I? What? It was inconceivable to me to go and visit Ayn Rand. She died in 1982. So she died a few days later, right? 1982, not 1985. She died while I was in the Israeli army. So they actually announced it on Israeli radio, on the national radio news, the day she died. I remember I was ironing. I was at the ironing board, ironing my uniform, getting ready to go to the base. It was a Sunday morning. And that night, the objectivists, we kind of got together and celebrated her life and did a little celebration. So, yes, I wish I would have had a chance to meet Ayn Rand. But looking back on it, I mean, the one thing I don't think I ever was an arrogant objectivist. I didn't think I was God's gift to the world of objectivism. When I read Atlas Shrugged, I didn't relate to the character of John Galt or even Reardon or Dagny. They were giants. I was a nobody. I had not done anything in my life yet. I was 16. I didn't know how smart I was or wasn't. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a clear career and a purpose in life. I'm much more related to Eddie Willers. Eddie Willers was my guy in Atlas Shrugged because that's how I felt about myself. I did not think I was exceptional. I know some of you still don't think I'm exceptional, and that's okay. But I was not the kind of 18-year-old who would say, well, Ayn Rand is dying to meet me, right? I am God's gift to Ayn Rand. No, I mean, I didn't cross my mind that I would bother her or to try to meet me. All right. I think we're done. That was the last Super Chat question. Unless somebody wants to jump in quickly with something, I think I'll call it a night. It's already 11:20 here. I'm debating whether I want to just lie down and go to sleep or whether I want to go downstairs and get a glass of wine and then go to sleep. The wine is tempting because I get high from these shows and it's hard for me to fall asleep right after a show because I'm a little jazzed up and high and adrenaline rush and everything like that. So maybe, but I do have to get up. I do have to get up early in the morning to catch my flight back to the United States. So Ed says get the wine. Red wine is the only thing I drink. I don't have anything against alcohol. I just don't handle it very well. I don't need melatonin. You know, I don't like using melatonin because it does. I do use it sometimes, but it definitely makes me sleepy the next day. So I only use it when I actually need it. And I shouldn't need it tonight because I'm tired. And I have a long flight tomorrow. I have to prepare my talk for Ocon. That'll be part of what I do tomorrow. I'll be reading Opa and writing my talk. How many standard drinks are you going to have tonight? I never have. I never have more than one glass of wine. I mean, never is a big deal. Sometimes I have 2 glasses of wine. but only with a meal. So if I'm just going to drink a glass of wine, it's going to be one glass. Believe me, nothing more than that. But you know what the reality is? The reality is I'm not going to go. It's just not worth it. Any views on evolution? I like it. I mean, I don't know what. I am a huge fan of evolution. I think evolution is one of the great scientific achievements in all of history. Charles Darwinism is amazing. So I'm big on evolution. I don't particularly buy is evolutionary psychology, which I think is much more than you need. I read wine stops REM sleep. Yeah, I think Gene is right. I think getting wine at 11:30 at night is probably not a good idea. It's probably better just to go to sleep and have wine tomorrow on the plane or something. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, everybody, for the financial support, for the super chat. Don't forget, if you like what I do, you can support it, and not just the Yaron Book Show, but my talks, my debates, my lectures, my seminars, everything that I do. If you like that, then you can support it, and the best way to support it is monthly. By the way, you can sponsor a show, and one of the ways to sponsor a show means that you get to dictate the topic, within reason, of course. That's $1,000. For $1,000, I'll talk about the topic you want. I still owe on cultural intelligence a show on different cultures. I'll do that when I get back to Puerto Rico in the next few weeks. But if you guys want to sponsor any shows, let me know. I also will be doing another Iran's Rules for Living, hopefully for life. Hopefully you guys value those. Value for value, please support the show on a monthly basis. You can do it on Patreon, on Subscribestar, or on YaronBookShow.com/support. Oh, you can also do it on locals, but YaronBookShow.com/support is, for me, the best way to do it, and I like the monthly consistency. So thank you to all of those who do $2, $5, $10, $25, $30, $50, $100, $250, $500, and I've got one person who does $2,000 a month right now. That's kind of the regular support that really makes it possible for me to travel around the world, do all these things, and keep producing the Yaron Book Show on a regular basis. We'll be back to more of a regular schedule starting on Monday, Tuesday, once I get over the jet lag, and at least until Ocon, and then the schedule goes poof again. I'll be a week at Ocon with very few shows. So just once I start traveling again, shows get more iffy, right? But we'll keep trying. Thank you all. And I will talk to you all from Puerto Rico next week. Bye, everybody.